Hey everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to do a breakdown on the track Sea of Symbols. Now, why are we doing this? Part of the reason is, okay, so a lot of this music that I release personally, you probably have already seen that is being released under public domain, Creative Commons 0, which means you can use it for whatever you want. You can study it, you can remix it, you can put it in whatever project you want. You don't have to give me credit. The credit is always appreciated. But you may have also seen that I also release the project files, so you can poke around in them, see how I've made things. But I thought it might be worth actually kind of going through some of the project files ourselves, so I can show you some of the things that I was trying to do, or I discovered, or anything like that. Now, to get to the project files, I've always got a link to the GitHub down in the description. Otherwise, if you go to my website here, johnosmanmusic.com, you can see up the top here, we've got a few links. You've got my personal albums, you've got game soundtracks that I've worked on or am working on. Downloads, that'll take you to archive.org, where you can download the full albums that I've released for free. Project files, that's the one we want. So click on that, and that'll take you to the GitHub. Now you can see here that you've got kind of all the folders of the different albums that I've been able to release project files for. Now this track, Sea of Symbols, is part of the project called A New Day in the Workshop. So I've just got that abbreviated here to ANDITW. Now, as it's currently the only folder in there, you'll see that it just goes straight through to Sea of Symbols. Once there's more tracks in there, you'll have to just click on this and then select Sea of Symbols there. Now what you can see inside here is that I've kind of labeled the different softwares that I've used, or different steps in the process of creating Sea of Symbols with 1, 2, 3, 4. So to start us off, let's look at the VCV Racks. You see I've got 5 different VCV Racks that I've used here. Let's take a look at some of them. So this first one is called Circ, C-I-R-C. At the moment, for the VCV racks I do and samples that I'm generating from them, I just choose 4 letter names, just as a convention that I think kind of looks cool and just keeps things kind of sort of named, but also a little bit ambiguous, so I don't get kind of too stuck in what I first wanted them to be. Sometimes it's helpful to have that kind of flexibility throughout the production process to let things change in their own ways. So let's take a listen to this. As you can hear, this is basically just doing some small percussion sounds. It's using entirely FM synthesis, using these Bog Audio FM operators. All the software that I'm going to show you and that I use in all my personal work here, you can actually download all of this entirely for free. VCV Rack is open source, it's free, at least the free version is free, and that's what I use. And all the modules here are also free, which means you can download the project files. You may need to download the modules as well, but then you can open up these project files and explore for yourself. So I won't go in too deep into each little thing that's happening, because we would be here for 4 hours. But if you're familiar with FM synthesis, that's essentially what's going on here. We've got operators going into operators and doing various things, and that's creating these 4 different sounds that you're hearing. If you're not familiar with FM synthesis, I highly recommend you look up some YouTube tutorials about it, because it's a very powerful form of synthesis. It's one of those ones that can be hard to control to get something good sounding immediately, but you can create wild sounds with it. And so as you get more familiar with it and more practiced, and you're able to tame it a bit more, it can be really cool to work with. Now, what's actually kind of driving the sequencing here? We've basically got these 2 Befarco plugins, modules. We've got the Mook Slicer and Perk All. So Mook Slicer is a number of things, but it's mainly, or at least in this sense, being used as a step sequencer. You can see we've got 4 steps here. These little lights are lighting up. It's normally 8 steps, but what you can do is have the gate output of step 4 going back to the reset input. And so it's every 4th beat is resetting itself. Turns it from 8 steps to 4 steps. Omri Cohen has some great videos on all VCV modules, but Especially recommend looking at his videos for learning how to use Befako modules. Percle is a envelope generator specifically for percussion envelopes. So that very kind of short attack and then kind of percussive, exponential or logarithmic, one of those kind of drop off there. You can either pass the audio directly through Percle and it'll just kind of increase the volume and decrease it so it creates that kind of nice shape, or you can actually use it as an envelope controller to control your mixer or something like that. In this case, I'm just using the actual audio straight from here and not controlling the levels. So we've got chord here. As you can hear, this is just constantly going. Nice kind of engine sound with some harmonics there that makes it kind of chordal sounding. And this actually ended up being used, even though it's called chord, this ended up being used as the bass in the track. And it worked in this really cool way where I'm not actually kind of setting the harmony of it itself, even though I've kind of got a pitch here. What I'm doing is, you know what, let me show you first. So I don't know if you could hear that, but I'm using the Audible Instruments random sampler here, which is kind of giving it a real kind of stutter, changing the clock rate of that. So kind of the frequency of that kind of stutter effect that's kind of shaping the volume. So we'll just call it stutter for short. The higher that frequency, the higher that rate, it actually audibly comes out to us as having kind of a pitch, and in this case it kind of sounds like a harmony as well. And so as I'm decreasing that rate, the actual pitch and the harmony is going down, and then as I increase the rate it goes back up. I was just messing around with this and it essentially built the bass line itself. Listen to this. So that's the bass line is slightly different to that, but that's essentially those three different pitches are what are being used. So I just recorded those out into a waveform and then use that as a sample. And then we'll see in Renoise in a moment, it was just chopping up that waveform and then triggering those different sections to get that bass line. It's just using the Volt Basal oscillator and kind of enveloping them. I won't go too much into how to use Audible Instruments random sampler, but highly recommend checking out the Audible Instruments plugins. If we go to brand Audible Instruments, if you're not familiar with these and you're just getting into VCV Rack or Cardinal, these are probably one of the first things you want to get familiar with. If you may have heard of Mutable Instruments, which was a company that made actual physical Euro rack and modular modules, which became staples for so many people. They're fantastic modules. Unfortunately, they're not around anymore, I believe. They're definitely not making the modules anymore. But one of the best things they did was open sourced how to make these modules, which is, you know, amazing. And this is one reason I'm so much into open source. Because of that, people were able to remake their modules as free to use plugins for VCV Rack. You know, you can find variations of the modules in Super Collider and Pure Data, Max, in pretty much anywhere else where people can build their own modules and audio programming. You have kind of copies of the Mutable Instruments modules. It's fantastic. So Audible Instruments, which is the one in VCV Rack, they've just changed the name of the kind of brand very slightly, just so it doesn't seem like it's the official release. But these are, you know, close to one-to-one recreations, I believe. The next one to look at is the file I've got, Crick, C-R-I-K. Now this is cool. This is using a couple modules that I'm just starting to get familiar with. The first one I want to talk about is Energy by Geodesics, which I'm getting increasingly impressed with. And the second one is Chronoblob 2 by All Right Devices. Again, you can download these for free into VCV Rack. Now let's just take a listen of what's going on. So basically, Energy is a ring mod oscillator. It's a basic oscillator that has some internal and external ring modulation capabilities. Sorry. So that lets you shape the sound very effectively and very fast. I'll probably talk more about Geodesics in another video when I'm using more of their modules, but I'm really enjoying first of all, the style of them. I mean, first of all, they just look great, and I love the kind of like style they've gone for. I know people are a bit split on this, but a lot of the controls, the whole modules are based on kind of physics equations. And so rather than straight kind of ring mod standard names that we usually have, they have like, this one is essentially E equals mc squared, the Einstein equation. So we've got knobs like momentum, M and C. So mass and C being the speed of light. And then E is the energy that comes out. That can be a little bit confusing at first, but they do actually have really fantastic manuals on their website, which help break down what each of the knobs do. So if we bypass the Chronoblob, which is a delay, basically we're just getting, that pulsing oscillator. And then Chronoblob is a dual delay. So it's kind of working as a ping pong delay with slightly different times on the left and right. So if we listen to this. You can see we're getting slightly different times on the left and right. And what I'm doing is I'm modulating using these two Quartz plugins. I'm modulating the delay time of the left and right. And that's basically both slowly changing the time of both the left and right, but it's also, as you'll find if you modulate the time of delays, you actually kind of get a cool kind of warbly pitch shift as well. So here we've got noise.vcv, and this is noise. And so the actual noise, red noise, is coming out of Geodesics brains. And so that's just coming out of this red output here, red noise output. And then it's actually, so brains is a sample and hold noise module, which if you've got something plugged into the center part, it starts doing sample and hold as opposed to just random generation. And I've just got a volt stress oscillator going in to the sample and hold just to mess around with that, just to change it from basically your kind of white noisy sounding or red noise sounding wind or waves to something that's a bit more digital sounding. And so while all these kind of sounds in this track kind of come together to make kind of, it's called Sea of Cymbals. So as I was working on it, it sounded very like under the ocean to me. I still wanted everything to sound, this is an ocean, but there's something digital about this ocean. So this one's quite harsh. This is Symb, short for cymbal. This came out, I had created the rest of the track already, and I just felt like it needed one more thing. And so I kind of went for a walk, and this might sound weird to people who don't do this kind of thing, but I kind of work quite visually and tend to imagine almost like visuals or like abstract visuals and stuff like that, and it kind of pieced together the scene or the world in my mind. And so I was imagining this kind of like the ocean, the digital ocean that we had created. And after walking for a while, I kind of started kind of imagining like kind of abstract characters or symbols, kind of like like classical Chinese characters, but not specifically that, but stuff in that kind of style. To represent that, I felt like it needed to be noise, but kind of not straight white noise, something a bit more kind of textured in a way that you don't always hear. Now, Noise Plethora is fantastic. It's got all these different kind of noise programs in there, and you can change the XA and the YA, which kind of change how the noise is being shaped. That's before you even do cutoffs. And so what you're hearing right now is one of the noises that came out. And then what I recorded out into the sample was me going through, I believe, a few different programs and then a few different positions on the XA and YA. And then what made it into the final track were kind of my favorite points that I felt like worked well both together, similar enough to be consistent, but different enough to be varied. So I highly recommend Befico Noise Plethora. That's currently my only #1 recommended noise plugin. The Brains one we were looking at is also very cool, but Noise Plethora literally has a plethora of different noises. So check that out. So the next part of this is the exports. And basically these are just sample wave exports that have been exported from Racks. So we don't need to listen to all of those. So we can jump across to #3, which is the Renoise Project. Now you can see I've got 2 here. I've got Symbol C and then Symbol C Remastered. The remastered one was basically what happened was I had originally uploaded it to YouTube. It sounded fantastic on my production headphones, and it's the same old trap of sounding really good on good quality headphones, and then listening to it on my kind of Apple headphones. The bass was way too loud and the melody was way too quiet. And so I ended up getting kind of a cheaper pair of speakers. I don't know if you can see these. Semi-cheaper, $80 Australian, as almost a third way of testing. And I've kind of now built that into my setup so I can quickly switch between production quality, regular headphone quality, and then between those 3 I'll get a better idea of how it sounds across different devices. And so after doing those 3 I kind of realized I needed to kind of reshape the levels, but we'll get to that. That's done more in the Reaper step. Let's open up Renoise. So here's the Renoise project that I've got. Let's take a quick listen. So you can hear, you've got Symbol is kind of happening quietly in the background. Those are panning kind of left and right. You can see I've kind of got that automated here with the P31, P21. That's just me kind of dragging this panning around to get that kind of that noise going back and forth. Our chords, it looks like C sharp, D sharp. Those are not necessarily the notes, but what those are, if we go to sampler on chord, that's playing these different slices that you can see here in Renoise. So this was the entire sample of all the different kind of noises that we're playing. If I just get rid of that ADSR and hold this down. You can hear that's those kind of 3 kind of bass notes, bass chords that I wanted to use. And then I put slices in so then we could just trigger each one with different keys. So that's what's happening there, and that follows throughout that whole track. what we're calling bubble here was the crick sound. So originally I thought it was crickets. Then I was making it and realized we were kind of under the ocean. It sounded more like bubbles. Now if we just solo bubbles, you can see it's basically just this bubble sound that we heard before. But what I'm loving is, and the reason I'm doing it in this process now, is I'm essentially creating my own samples that I can then use on the kind of keyboard and have them as different notes. The reason I'm doing this is that I'm very inspired by like the late 90s, early 2000s electronic and video game music, which use sampling like this very heavily. If you've listened to, my early kind of Sound Worlds music, early-ish, so Sound Worlds Datapedia 1 and 2, many of the tracks off there use kind of the Roland virtual versions of the instruments from the late 90s and early 2000s, which I believe use this kind of thing extensively. There's this part of it where it's like not realistic sounding. And you get this thing that originally seemed not cool, where you play up high and any rhythms in the sample play fast, and then you play down low and any of them are really slow. So you can hear there like how drastic that is. But what happens is when you actually stack these into chords, you get these like, it's almost like polyrhythms within the same chord. Take a listen to this. It's something I figured out a while ago, actually while I was using Massive X, and I was manually kind of modulating the higher notes to modulate faster and the lower notes to modulate slower, because they've got a cool thing in Massive X. But using samples does the same thing. I love it. That's why I do it. And whereas, I was previously using the Roland software, because I want to make this both I want to go deeper myself into the actual sound design, instrument design, even audio processing design. And also I want to make it all kind of freely available for you guys to explore as much as possible. That's why I'm now creating my own samples with VCV Rack, and likely going to be other software as well that is free for you guys to use. I could go through specifics of composition, but I think maybe that would be easier for you guys to download the project, the Renoise file, and open up, Renoise, whether you have the demo, which is full featured essentially, or the paid version, and you can explore yourself. It's fairly simple composition, but I was going more for specific vibes. Then you can see we've got the noise. Which is very subtle, but this is just it's kind of noise just going in and out. A very slow modulation here, slow attack, slow release, and I tried to time that so it kind of cycles once per pattern here, and that's just kind of meant to sound like the waves rolling in and out in the background, and then slowly switching between the kind of classic wave sound and then that kind of more digitally static sound as well. Now circ, which is the kind of drum pattern, you can see here, circ, this is at least the resulting sample that we brought over after we had generated a whole lot of those kind of different sounds. These have also been mapped to different keys, like a drum pad. What you might notice between these different samples is I've gone and manually changed the volume and transposition of them to try and get them sounding either roughly the same pitch or like consistent and coherent, and same with volume as well. Originally, as you can see from the sample, some things were a lot louder than other things, Just trying to kind of level that out a bit while still having some dynamics there. Obviously the drums or percussion, whatever you want to call them, are not big standout in this track, but they're kind of there to give it that kind of driving forward momentum, at least in a background element, for what you could argue is a semi-ambient track. I don't know whether to call these kind of 90s inspired video game music tracks ambient or not. To me, they're kind of like paint virtual worlds. That's what happens in my head. That's why I'm into them. So yeah. So you'll see here, number 4 is Reaper. And you'll just be looking for the Symbo-C mastering. It was originally called Symbo-C, not Sea of Symbols. That was based on the old album concept where every track basically was a 8-character name with the underscore. I've now changed it, still using underscores for that kind of digital kind of style, but full words just so you know a bit more explicitly what I have in mind. Still, you interpret it whatever way resonates with you. That's the balance I'm trying to strike here. Communicating what I see, what I feel, but you know, it's yours. Interpret it how you want. So we're in Reaper now, and what you can see is we've got the different stems, the different kind of tracks were exported separately from Renoise and they're brought into here. You may be wondering, if you haven't used Reaper much, or if you are new to Reaper, you might say, what are these things? Where are the waveforms? We're currently looking at the spectrums, the frequency spectrums. This can be changed by going to, you go View, Peaks Display Settings, which I've already got open over here. So you can see display mode spectrogram, but we can go peaks, which you'll be used to. Spectral peaks, which is actually really handy for kind of getting a bit of both. So you can see like certain colors will show that parts of the track are that frequency heavy. Spectrogram and peaks if you want both, but you know, everything's tiny then. But because I was trying, basically what I worked out was that it wasn't the bass itself was too loud, because when I turned it down, then you couldn't really get the kind of tone of the bass that I wanted. In fact, the whole bass went quite quiet, but it was actually a certain frequency in the bass. And this is the main thing I want to kind of show here. Usually this could be done with an equalizer, but what you actually have in Reaper is spectral editing. And what you can see here is I've created this spectral bar, which if I right click and go spectral edits, add spectral edit to item, we've got a new bar that we can move around. I won't go through the full tutorial of how to do them here, but basically you have a few different options where you can, you know, you set a certain frequency range. We've got 157 to 392 Hertz here. And then you can kind of, if I click that, you've got a few different options, even more so if you expand this out. You know, you can fade the top and the bottom. You can give it a gain, which is essentially what I did. I actually lowered it by just over 10 dB in that range. So it's kind of equalization in a, I don't know whether to call it more precision, but in a more kind of visual way where you can see the whole waveform. But also, I think where this is maybe especially helpful, other than this, is that, you know, it doesn't have to be the whole track. You can do segments. So you can use this creatively as well. You can, and it doesn't have to be a box shape. You can kind of draw interesting shapes. So you can kind of scan up and down frequencies to give it kind of sweeps, and I'll let you explore that. And I'm sure I will be exploring that in a future track. You know, other than that, I've got kind of EQ on some of these to bring up the highs, to give them a bit more clarity, and bring down the lows for a bit more space. And then on our master track, we've got just a limiter and a frequency spectrum analyzer. Just part of this is me getting used to Reaper as well. So I've tried to use only kind of Reaper native plugins here. You can open the project file yourself. Oh, one other cool thing here with Reaper is, so after exporting out all these different stems, you can actually normalize. And so if I've just highlighted all these, if I go actions, show action list, search for normalize, you know, you can normalize to different ways. But what I really like is if you see this first one, normalize peak RMS LUFS, click on that. You can actually choose, any of these, but Luft's integrated, which kind of scans the whole sample, or whole stem, I should say. And then based on that, you can set the target Luft's level. And you can also normalize each item separately or normalize items together. So separately, we'll basically bring each one up individually. That's not good for kind of music stems necessarily, because everything will be maxed, and then when they're summed together, that'll go beyond 0 dB and distort out. The common gain then kind of takes the whole and has them maxed out in relation to everything else. If you haven't looked into Lufts much, that's so your dB that you generally see on meters is kind of like a more specific technical volume, whereas LUFS that's more based on perceived loudness of human hearing. So that can actually be quite a helpful way to measure things, because you might have something that's technically high volume, especially in lower frequencies, but it doesn't actually sound that loud to people listening. And we're making music for people, not for computers necessarily. It's something I'm just starting to use a bit more, and Reaper has been really helpful for that. So that's essentially the breakdown of Sea of Symbols. You can listen to it on my YouTube channel as well. You can download the final wave from GitHub at the moment, and then when this album's completed, all the tracks are done, then I'll be able to release the album on archive.org and Bandcamp. Still deciding about streaming services at the moment. We'll talk about that another time. All right, guys, you have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.